The parking ticket fluttered against the windshield like a small white flag of surrender. $85. Not a suggestion. Not a request. A demand that might as well have been $1,000 for all the difference it made to Carmen Reyes, standing in the afternoon drizzle outside the downtown library where she'd just finished her shift. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cool glass of her 10-year-old sedan, letting the rain mix with something that might have been tears if she'd had the energy left for crying. Because this wasn't just about a parking fine. It was about another crack in a foundation already spiderwebbed with fractures. Carmen was 31, a library assistant barely keeping her head above water in the coastal city of Harborview. Her days began in darkness, preparing breakfast and school lunches for her two sons, 8-year-old twins who deserved so much more than hand-me-down clothes and maybe next time, when they asked for things other kids had. Her ex-husband's child support checks arrived with the reliability of shooting stars, which meant never when you needed them. She worked at the Harborview Public Library, a limestone building that smelled of old paper and floor polish, where she shelved books, helped patrons navigate computers, and ran story time for children who reminded her painfully of her own. The pay was modest. The hours were inflexible. But it came with health care, and in Carmen's world, that made it precious. That Tuesday had been relentless. A burst pipe in the children's section meant moving hundreds of books, patrons frustrated by closed areas, and Carmen staying 2 hours past her shift to help with cleanup. Unpaid, because that's what dedicated employees did. She'd parked in a metered spot that morning, fed it her last quarters, but the overtime meant she'd exceeded the limit by 47 minutes. 47 minutes that now cost $85 she didn't have. She drove home in silence, the ticket sitting on the passenger seat like an unwelcome companion. Her apartment was in the Riverside district, where the buildings leaned tired against each other and the playground equipment wore its rust openly. The boys were with her mother, who watched them after school in exchange for groceries Carmen could barely afford. That evening, she picked them up, listened to their excited chatter about a field trip she'd need to find money for, and made dinner from pantry staples that required creativity to call a meal. After tucking them in, she sat at her kitchen table with the ticket, a calculator, and a spreading sense of defeat. The next morning, Carmen arrived at the library early, as she always did. She liked the quiet before opening, when the building held its breath and books waited patiently to be discovered. She was reshelving returns in the biography section when she noticed him. The man sat at one of the research tables near the tall windows, surrounded by architectural journals and old city planning documents. He wore an expensive wool sweater and reading glasses that caught the morning light. His posture suggested someone accustomed to boardrooms, not public libraries. But what struck Carmen was his focus. He wasn't pretending to read while scrolling his phone. He was genuinely absorbed, taking notes in a leather journal with fountain pen precision. Over the following hours, Carmen found herself crossing his path repeatedly. When the copier jammed, she fixed it without being asked. When he seemed to struggle finding a specific historical survey, she located it in the reference section within minutes. When lunch came, she noticed he'd brought nothing, so she pointed him toward the small cafe 2 blocks over that wouldn't break the bank. Each time, he looked up with a peculiar expression. Not gratitude exactly, but attention. Like he was seeing something most people missed. His name, she learned from his library card when he checked out several books, was Daniel Westbrook. It meant nothing to her, though a younger colleague whispered later that he was that Westbrook, the one who'd made a fortune in sustainable architecture and now funded projects across the country. Carmen treated him as she treated everyone, with professional courtesy and the kind of small kindnesses that cost nothing but meant everything. She didn't know he was wealthy. She didn't know he was important. She only knew that someone reading that intently deserved not to be interrupted by a jammed copier or a fruitless search. When the library closed at 6, Carmen gathered her things slowly, dreading the drive home where the parking ticket waited on her refrigerator like a judgment. She did her final walkthrough, ensuring everything was in order, before heading to the staff room. Her coat hung on its usual hook. But when she reached for it, something fell from the pocket. An envelope that hadn't been there that morning. Her name was written across it in careful script. Just Carmen. Nothing more. The staff room was empty. The library was silent except for the tick of the old radiator. Carmen's hands trembled as she opened it, some instinct telling her this moment mattered in ways she couldn't yet understand. Inside was a letter, typed on heavy cardstock. Dear Carmen, you don't know me, but I've spent today observing something rare. Someone who shows up fully even when exhausted, who helps others even when struggling, who brings grace to work others consider beneath notice. I watched you fix problems that weren't your responsibility. I watched you guide a confused elderly man to the audiobook section with patience that never wavered. I watched you straighten the children's area on your break because you couldn't stand to see it disheveled. This morning, I also watched you return to your car to find a parking ticket, and I saw how carefully you folded it before driving away. What I'm offering is not charity. It's recognition that some people spend their lives building foundations for others while their own crumbles. That shouldn't be invisible. The letter continued, explaining that Daniel's foundation funded what he called infrastructure of human capital, identifying people whose potential was trapped by circumstance and creating pathways forward, not handouts, opportunities. Enclosed was a check that made Carmen sit down hard on the wooden bench. It covered the parking ticket, yes, but also 3 months of rent, groceries, the field trip, and the winter coats her boys needed. But more than that was a business card and an invitation to call. No strings, no obligations, just a conversation about what she might do if the floor beneath her feet wasn't constantly threatening to give way. Carmen sat in that empty staff room until the security guard gently knocked, letting her know it was time to lock up. She drove home in a daze, the envelope pressed against her chest like a promise. That night, after the boys were asleep, she read the letter 17 times, each reading confirming it was real. The next day, she called the number. A warm voice answered, already expecting her. They talked for an hour about Carmen's dreams before life got complicated. Her half-finished degree in education, her idea for literacy programs in underserved neighborhoods, her belief that access to books could change everything. We believe that too, the voice said. Let's talk about what's possible. Months unfolded slowly, then quickly. Carmen didn't quit the library. She loved it too much. But the foundation connected her with a mentor who helped her finish her degree through night classes they funded. They introduced her to grant writers who helped her articulate the literacy program taking shape in her mind. The library director, noticing Carmen's growing expertise, promoted her to community outreach coordinator. It came with a raise that meant she could finally breathe, could say yes sometimes instead of always maybe later. Within 2 years, Carmen had launched Pages for All, a mobile literacy program that brought books and reading tutors to apartment complexes in neighborhoods like Riverside. The program hired single parents as tutors, creating jobs while serving families who couldn't access traditional library programs. Daniel's foundation provided initial funding, then helped Carmen secure grants from other sources. But the vision, the execution, the heart of it, that was all Carmen. The program grew. Other cities took notice. Carmen spoke at conferences, wrote grants, and trained other communities to replicate the model. Her sons, now in middle school, volunteered with the program, shelving books in the mobile library van and reading to younger children. 5 years after that rainy Tuesday, Carmen stood in the Harborview Public Library at an event celebrating Pages for All's expansion to 10 cities. The reading room was packed with families, volunteers, and supporters. Daniel Westbrook sat in the back row, exactly as he had that first day, watching quietly. When their eyes met, he offered a small nod, not of pride or ownership, but of recognition between two people who understood that change rarely arrives with trumpets and fanfare. After the speeches ended, Carmen found him examining the biography section where they'd first crossed paths. "You still come here," she said. "Best library on the coast," he replied. "And I like to see what I'm investing in." "The program, you mean?" "No," he looked at her directly. "The people who notice what others miss. That's the real investment." He handed her another envelope, thinner than the first. Inside was a single piece of cardstock with 3 words. "Keep building foundations." Carmen laughed, surprising herself with how easy it felt now, How different from that afternoon when everything seemed to be crumbling. "I got another parking ticket last month," she said. "Did you?" "Yeah, I framed it." He smiled. A real smile that transformed his careful face. "Why?" Reminder that sometimes what looks like the worst day is just the day before everything changes. They stood together in comfortable silence, surrounded by books that held 1,000 stories of transformation, of people who'd stumbled and risen, of small moments that pivoted entire lives. The library was preparing to close. Families gathered children and coats. Volunteers packed up displays. Carmen's boys waited by the front desk, patient now, secure in ways that went deeper than money. Daniel collected his coat and moved toward the exit, then paused. "Same time next year?" "Same table," Carmen confirmed. He nodded and was gone, disappearing into the evening crowd like anyone else, which was exactly what he wanted to be. Carmen locked up that night, the last to leave as always. She paused at the research table where Daniel had sat years ago, where her life had pivoted on the axis of someone noticing she was worth noticing. The building settled around her, familiar and solid. Foundation, she thought. That's what they'd both been building. Him by looking for people others overlooked, her by creating pathways for families society pretended not to see. She thought about that parking ticket, framed now in her office. $85 that had felt like the end of something. But endings and beginnings, she'd learned, often wore the same face until time revealed which was which. Carmen turned off the lights and stepped into the night, where her boys waited in a car that was newer now but still carried the same love that had kept the old one running. The city stretched before them, bright and full of possibility. Sometimes transformation announced itself with dramatics, lightning strikes and lottery wins and miracle rescues. But more often, Carmen had learned, it came quietly. A letter in a pocket, a stranger paying attention, a door opening so gently you almost missed it. The parking ticket had been real. The struggle had been real. But so was this, the slow, steady building of something that would outlast them both. Foundations that held not just buildings but futures. Carmen drove home through streets she knew by heart, past the library that had saved her by giving her a place to save others, toward an apartment that was still small but no longer felt like it was closing in. And in the rearview mirror, if she'd looked, she might have seen Daniel Westbrook standing outside the library, watching her taillights disappear, already thinking about the next person who needed someone to notice they were quietly building something beautiful from nothing. But Carmen didn't look back. She was too busy moving forward, carrying with her the knowledge that had changed everything. Sometimes the world doesn't change with thunder. Sometimes it changes with attention, with someone seeing what others miss, with small acts that compound into transformation. And sometimes, when you're ready to give up, the universe tucks an envelope in your pocket and whispers, "Not yet. Your foundation is just beginning."